My pronouns are they, he, she, and I am the campaigns officer for the LGBTQ plus forum, and I'm here today to talk to you about how to be an activist. And I just want to preface this talk by saying anyone can be an activist. It's not something you're born with, it's something you learn, it's something that anyone can do if they have the enthusiasm for. And I'm hoping by the end of this talk, people know how to get involved with causes that matter to them, that people know what actions are available to them as an activist, and that people will go on to make a positive change. And just quickly, how this relates to History Month is it's all about rights in a sense. And a lot of people think rights are these God-given things that can't be taken away and are an innate thing that you're born with, but sadly, people will take away your rights, and you have to fight for your rights for them at every opportunity. You can't take your eye off the ball. So the Stonewall riots, Stonewall uprising, I should say, that wasn't a legal thing. It wasn't something that loads of politicians in suits made happen. It wasn't a law. It was people fighting for their rights and people who just wanted to live. And to bring that forward into a contemporary context, we have lots of issues today regarding the trans plus community. And whilst they have legal protection, they don't necessarily see that every day. And it's important to keep that in mind. Yeah, once you win, you don't just stop there, you have to keep on fighting. Right, starting with the main points of the meeting. So, if you do want to be an activist, I say the first thing you want to do is you've obviously got some sort of cause in mind, some sort of group, some sort of aim, and just do your research. You'll find it as usually some sort of local group, organisation, a charity, a union, or even that has a similar aim or represents a similar group of people to you. And you can find that a lot of the time they're very welcoming to new members, and if you want to get involved with them, that is probably the easiest route to just drop an email, attend one of their events, join their Facebook groups. You'll find people who have similar, views to you, similar want to do similar things, and they're usually more than accepting of people. So that's the first step, and just get involved with what they do. And yeah, a lot of you can just fall in with the right crowd, and that makes things really easy. And before you know it, you'll be organizing all sorts of stuff. So yeah, reach out to local organisations with aims similar to yours. That is the first step. Secondly, though, you'll find stuff. You'll find there'll be something that there is no organisation for. Either it's got a very niche thing, or it's something that's very pressing that you only just thought of, and you'll find that you'll have to start from scratch, and that can seem really daunting, but it isn't. Some on university, some of the best campaigning, some of the best activists have just been a few friends meeting, or in the case of a pandemic, having a group chat, bouncing ideas together, and deciding to get something done. And you can't denigrate the importance of doing something like this. So yeah, I'd say after you've done your research and if you've found, you might still be able to find organizations across the country that do something similar to you, or people that have done similar things themselves, and you can magpie bits of their campaigns. You can see what they've done well, see what they've done bad, and yeah, it's just about getting your friends together and deciding to do something. So after you've done your research, you want to decide on an objective of your campaign. You want something quantifiable that you can work towards, that at the same time isn't beyond your own scope, isn't beyond your ability to carry out. So you do have to remember or take into account at least what resources you have and what you can access. So you have to have this goal, and it has to be measurable. You need to know when you've reached this goal. If you have like something that's very broad or something that you can't measure, either you won't know when you've won, you won't know when you've lost, or people won't know what they're fighting for. I'm just going to run down a few tools available to people. I've got a massive list here because there is so much you can do as an activist. I think the first thing that's really quite useful is a social media page. Having a nice graphic, having a little bit about your group or yourself and what you're trying to achieve, and having a way to contact people within your organization or within your informal power structures or however you're running this thing. It's really good just to have a little landing page where people know what to look. They can follow you for updates and stuff. But that only works if you do it in conjunction with other tools, with other things. So there's stuff like, quite physical things like leaflets, posters, banners, getting your presence up. If you're doing things on campus, especially in a normal year, I don't think there's any substitute for just plastering a place in posters and hanging a banner, even if it might go against a few codes. You can push the rules, you can be slightly disruptive to a degree. Basically, there's a very fine line, and you can push it a bit. So yeah, plaster a place with posters is always great. And there's more stuff like open letters, really useful because we get more people on board with your campaign. They work to publicise what you're trying to do, as well as directly addressing an organisation or a person that you're trying to influence. They're really good. Then there's like formal procedures. You can do like freedom of information requests, petitions, internal things. So if you're trying to change something about LUSU, you can submit motions at the AGM, you can petition them, you can submit freedom of information requests to see how they're spending money on certain things. There's all these little things that you can do that sometimes get overlooked, but they can just be really, really useful. And also sometimes fundraising is important, and how you get your funds is, I'll get into that in a bit, but yeah, it's good to know how much funding you'll need and how you're planning on getting that. And then the final thing I just want to say regarding that point is get started. Some things you can think of on the fly. You can gauge how much progress you're making on the fly. You can think about what numbers you're planning on getting on the fly. As long as you have a solid aim, the first thing you can do is, start making that social media page, start typing out that email, and it all snowballs on from there. It's going to talk a little bit about social movement theory, and this is where I'll get into funding. So I'm a fan of grassroots bottom-up funding, bottom-up movement, sorry. And that's because you can get away with a lot more stuff if you're a grassroots movement without a formal structure or organisation. If I'm doing a campaign for the LGBTQ forum, I have to keep in mind the Articles of Association for LUSU. If I'm doing something as an individual or a group of friends, I don't have to go through as many bureaucratic measures, which, they are important, they're there for a reason, but sometimes it can be useful to not have to regard them. You get more input over direction as well if you're a member-led movement. If you're a grassroots organisation, every member is important, everyone gets a say in how they do things, and anyone can get involved. And then finally, if you're a members-led movement, you don't have the same sort of ties to where you get your funding from. So I'm part of a charity group called Outreach, which helps working class students have the same opportunities, but they get a lot of their funding from big accounting firms and banks and the kind of people that preserve the class inequalities they're fighting against. And due to this, all of the skills workshops they do are run by these accounting firms, are run by banks, and it's about getting more working class people into big business rather than addressing the issues in the first place. But they can't do anything about this because that's how they get their funding. So that's one thing to think about, is independence. There are some benefits to these big organizations and these top-down structures. Typically you will have more resources. Sometimes you'll have access to permanent staff, you'll have media connections potentially, and a little bit insider knowledge, so it can be really useful. But it's worth bearing in mind what kind of campaign, what kind of protest you're wanting to run, and thinking about what's best to approach. Is it best to get a load of angry students together, bottom-up approach, a grassroots movement, or is it good to do a top-down approach, maybe work with LUSU and see what their officers can do? And last little point is why do campaigns fail? And the main reasons are the aims are too wide or unclear. That's just a lot of campaigns decide to shoot for the moon straight away, and they will inevitably fall short for what they are, or they just have a really, really vague end goal. So it's like the Occupy movement a few years back, massive protest, but that failed because it didn't have clear goals. It's just like we're angry at the system, but we don't have any sort of structure we want to put in place here. We don't have any points going forward. We're just angry, and this is an expression of that anger, which ultimately changes very little. They'll get their 2 weeks in with press, but after that, it kind of gets lost out of the public consciousness. There's also a lack of leadership or structure. So grassroots movements are really good, but it doesn't mean that you can't do it without structure. You know, if it's good to have someone checking your social media and making sure that people get replied to when we get in touch. It's good to have people organising events, and it doesn't mean that it has to be a hierarchical structure. But you know, you can have a flat structure that works just as well. But it is important to delegate responsibility. And finally, burnout. Again, you have to keep in mind what resources you have available to you, how much time people are willing to give, and sometimes it can all just get a bit too much. So you want to, when you're planning out your campaign, when you're planning out your movement, your protest, you need to know how much time you can commit to this thing. And if you can't get new members coming in, if you can't get fresh faces and people bringing your movement forward, and then you really need to start thinking about focusing on the areas that are really important. And last little bit is it's so much fun. Like the amount of friends, like lifetime friends I have made through campaigning, through activism, through getting involved in strikes, through being on picket lines. Yeah, it's just there's no substitute for it. And knowing that you've had such an impact on something important, knowing that you've fed people on campus, you know, knowing that you've helped people campaign against injustice, knowing that you've brought forward a policy which is going to help so many people, it's just so rewarding. And then the skills you pick up. I recently applied for an internship, and my CV was just absolutely loaded with things I've picked up from the campaign trail, from activism. You know, it's just like communicating with people, addressing large audiences, door knocking, feel confident on the phone, knowing like the basics of graphic design, knowing GDPR regulations. It's just so much you can get out of it. So if there's anyone out there tonight that's just thinking, I want to change this about the university, or there's this issue that's annoying me, or the government is doing this one thing that really, really affects me, you know, the first thing you can do is just get out there and try fix it. And I know it's never as simple as that, but I'm hoping that I've given a basic overview of what actions are available to people and what you can do. So thank you for listening.